this diagram, you can see some important structures found in plants. Plants have both male and female reproductive organs. The male part of the plant is called the stamen and is composed of two parts, the anther and the filament. The anther produces pollen. The filaments hold the anthers. The female part of the plant is called the carpel and is composed of three parts, the stigma, the style, and the ovaries. The job of the stigma is to collect pollen grains. The style connects the stigma to the ovary and the pollen tube grows down this structure after pollination. But more about this later. The ovary produces the ovules which contain the sex cells. If you look at this picture of a plant, it looks very different from the first diagram we looked at. What are the differences you can spot? You can pause the video while you write some down. The plant is called a wind-pollinated flower and it uses wind to pollinate, and the first flower we looked at is called an insect-pollinated flower because it uses insects to pollinate. Because of how these plants are pollinated, they have different features. Looking firstly at the insect-pollinated flowers, they have the following features. They have large, colourful petals to attract insects. They have a scent and nectar to attract insects to the plant. They have sticky, spiky pollen grains to attach to insects. The anthers are located inside the flower, so the insects have to brush past them. They have a sticky stigma to collect pollen grains, and it is located on the inside of the flower, so insects have to brush past it. If we compare this to a wind-pollinated flower, these, however, rather than having a large petal, they have small, dull petals. They have no smell or nectar. More pollen grains are produced than insect-pollinated flowers. Their pollen is smooth and small and light, so it can be easily carried in the wind. Anthers are found on the outside of the flower, so the pollen can easily be lost. Stigma is feathery and found on the outside of the leaf to catch pollen. Insects will move from plant to plant collecting nectar. As the insect moves through the plant to collect this nectar, pollen sticks to them. The insect will eventually leave the plant, carrying the pollen with it. It brushes past the sticky stigma, leaving behind the pollen when it reaches the next plant. This process is called pollination. The wind will carry pollen in wind-pollinated flowers, where the feathery stigma catches the pollen. The pollen grows a pollen tube, which grows towards the ovary and attaches to the ovule at an opening called the micropyle. A male gamete travels down the pollen tube to fertilize the female gamete. This process is known as fertilization. The fertilized ovule develops into a seed, and the rest of the carpel becomes the fruit. Germination is a process that is controlled by enzymes in which the seed begins to develop into a new young plant. The seed contains a zygote which divides into cells that then develop into the embryo plant. When the seed germinates, this embryo begins to grow into the young seedling. Structures known as cotyledons surround the embryo. Some plants have one cotyledon, whereas others have two. Cotyledons contain food reserves that supply the young seedling with food. Amylase breaks down starch into maltose and then glucose. This glucose can be used in respiration to provide energy for growth before the plant can photosynthesize and make its own glucose. There are three important conditions for germination. Water, this allows the seeds to swell and the embryos starts to grow. After taking in water, the seed coat splits. This leads to the production of the plumule and the radicle. It is important as chemical reactions also happen here. Oxygen is needed for aerobic respiration. Warmth, this increases growth rate and enzyme activity. Hi, my name is Mr. Science, aka Salim. If you're new to the channel, please remember to like and subscribe, and for more teaching resources, you can visit my website at www.mrscience.co.uk.